No worries. Hello, everybody. Welcome to 2026. We are so happy you are here to join us. We're continuing it on from last year and previous years, but every Friday at noon, we go live with an environmentally focused topic. And we are continuing that today with Wally Taylor. And we are going to be talking about the Wildlife Action Plan, some updates, what we hopefully see in the future. And so with that, I will hand it over to you, Wally, to get us started.
Okay. Now we're going to talk about Iowa's Wildlife Action Plan. So let's go to the next slide. First of all, what is the Wildlife Action Plan? In order to receive federal funding for wildlife programs, a state is required to prepare a wildlife action plan. And now what you may not know is that there is federal funding for wildlife programs. That federal funding comes primarily from federal licenses and fees from hunters and anglers. There's been a lot of talk, and I think Sierra Club probably supports it, of maybe having some fees or I don't want to call them taxes, but money from people who enjoy the outdoors, enjoy wildlife, but don't hunt or fish. So that would bring more money into these programs. The Wildlife Action Plan outlines the steps needed to conserve wildlife and habitat before they become too rare and costly to restore. You know, there comes a point when there's just no way to bring wildlife back once their habitat is gone or they've been hunted out of existence, for example. And the Wildlife Action Plan must be updated every 10 years. The 2025 version of the Iowa plan is now in draft form. There was a comment period that ended December 13th. The final issue of the plan is not out yet, but should be out very soon. They wanted to get it out by the end of the year. So I don't know if they actually made it or not. I haven't seen anything on the website yet, but it should be out shortly if it hasn't come out at this point. So let's go to the next slide. There are requirements for what must be in the Wildlife Action Plan, and I've set out here the 8 required elements. A lot of it is informational, researching and determining what the state of wildlife and their habitat is at the present time in Iowa, and a description of the problems specifically affecting species that they designate as species of greatest conservation need. That isn't necessarily just threatened and endangered species. It's species that are on the brink and need some attention given to them in order to protect them and their habitat. The action plan also describes the conservation actions necessary to conserve those species and their habitats, and that's a really important part of the action plan. And then the strategies for monitoring the conservation efforts and reviewing progress toward those goals every 10 years when the plans are updated, so that we can see how much progress, if any, has been made, what needs to be done, and the ways to keep on track with the goals that we need to preserve the species and their habitats. And a public participation aspect is very important in the Wildlife Action Plan as well. We all need to be involved. So let's go to the next slide. In Iowa's Wildlife Action Plan, the purpose of the plan is to shape how we protect wildlife, restore habitat, and ensure healthy ecosystems for the next decade. The draft includes several important improvements from the 2015 plan that was issued. It adds new groups of species of greatest conservation need, including plants, bumblebees, and additional moths. You know, we think maybe that the bumblebees and moths aren't that important, but they really are an important part of the ecosystem in terms of pollination and perhaps being prey for other animals. And so it all is connected, including the plants. The animals feed on those plants. The plants are part of the pollination cycle. So it's all connected. John Muir, who started the Sierra Club, said something to the effect that when we try to pick out anything in the universe, we find it connected to something else. So that's an important part of what the Wildlife Action Plan intends to do, is make those connections. The plan further updates many existing species groups, such as fish, amphibians, reptiles, mammals, butterflies, mussels, and more. It also upgrades the land cover data needed to map habitat. It's important to know what habitat we have, where it is, and how we can maybe restore more habitat. It further incorporates 10 more years of monitoring data that we've had since the 2015 version of the plan. And it reflects updated endangered species status. We've added some more endangered and threatened species to the list. So that's important to know what endangered and threatened species we have so we can give them the required protection. And it aligns the plan with modern conservation frameworks like the Conservation Measures Partnerships open standard. So we need to have some way to measure how much progress we're making. Let's go to the next slide. Iowa's Wildlife Action Plan does a very good job of describing the history and current status of Iowa's land and wildlife. Unfortunately, Iowa is the most biologically altered state in the nation. Over 80% of our land area in Iowa is taken by agriculture. And if you add to that the urban sprawl, the constant highway, the construction, new highways, 4 lanes, and other development, that doesn't leave very much for the wildlife and natural areas. And over the years, many species have become extinct in Iowa or are now in jeopardy. Habitat is greatly reduced, and prairies, woodlands, wetlands are only a fraction of what they once were. Now, there are 2 books that I would really recommend that everybody read. The first one is by James Dinsmore. I don't know if you can see that. It's called A Country So Full of Game. It was written in 1994, and it documents all of the wildlife that we have lost since European settlement. Mr. Dinsmore and his son Stephen have updated that book just in 2023. So about 30 years of what they call Iowa's Changing Wildlife. And we've made some progress and some not so much. And in fact, we've perhaps fallen backwards in some areas. So I would I'd really recommend that everybody read those books to get a sense of where we are in bringing Iowa back from being the most biologically altered state in the nation. So let's go to the next slide. Iowa's Wildlife Action Plan states that its strategy and its goal is that Iowa will have healthy ecosystems that incorporate diverse native habitats capable of sustaining viable wildlife populations by 2030. That's only 4 years away. And unfortunately, we have a long way to go. But we certainly support this goal, and we all should do everything we can to make sure that goal becomes a reality. To accomplish this goal, the Wildlife Action Plan describes numerous concepts. So let's go to the next slide. First of all, the plan sets out 5 strategies for Iowa's wildlife. A lot of it is getting the knowledge and information we need. But one of the most important to me is number 3, protection, restoration, reconstruction, and connection and enhancement of native plant communities and wildlife habitats. And 4, to restore viable wildlife populations to suitable habitats through informed relocation and reintroduction programs. These are important because, as I said, Iowa is so biologically altered that we need to take action to restore and reconstruct and create the habitats and wildlife populations. And, you know, that has to be done carefully because when we try to manage by human effort nature and the wildlife and the habitats, we have to do it carefully because, you know, nature does it much better than we do, but we can do the best we can and try to be informed about the best way to do it. The old adage is that nature bats last, but we need to make sure that we're doing it in a way that nature would try to do it. And certainly nature takes many, many years to do it right, and we're trying to do it much more quickly. So we need to be humble about how we do it. And finally, we need to develop methods to identify and reduce economic and social conflicts between wildlife and citizens. This has been the real challenge that we've had in protecting wildlife and habitat is that, as I said, we haven't seen in Iowa all of the species that have been extinct or are very rare, and the habitat that so much of it is gone, that we need to figure out how we can connect all of these efforts to the economic and social conflicts that are there and just help people economically and socially live in harmony with wildlife and nature. The Iowa legislature back in 1989 passed what's called the Resource Enhancement and Protection Act. And in that act, they cited the current situation as it was in 1989. It's just as bad or maybe worse now. What they said is the state of Iowa has lost 99 and 9/10% of its prairies, 98% of its wetlands, 80% of its woodlands, 50% of its topsoils, and more than 100 species of wildlife since European settlement in the early 1800s. So that's a real stark description of where we are with respect to our wildlife and natural areas. So let's go to the next slide. And the Wildlife Action Plan also sets out 5 strategies for wildlife habitats. And again, it's a matter of protecting, restoring, reconstructing, and enhancing large public and private areas. And we need to try to get more habitat into public ownership or public control so that it's really protected. But also we need to work with private landowners to encourage them and show them ways that it's their benefit and how they can provide habitat on private lands on a landscape scale so that the wildlife have enough room to roam, to be connected to all of the habitat that they need. And that includes plants. You don't think necessarily of plants needing the corridors or areas of connectivity, but plants when their seeds are dispersed in the wind, when animals disperse the seeds by eating them and leaving waste, or birds and so on being attached to the animal's body and dispersed that way. So plants diversify as well. So we need to think about all of that and to do it carefully. Let's go to the next slide. Strategies for wildlife management. As I said, management is something that we need to really be careful about because, we need to manage in a way that mimics what nature would do and not what we think we can do. Some wildlife managers think that just because they can do something, they should. I remember years ago, I had a case where the county conservation director in a certain county wanted to take down a lot of old growth trees in a county park, thinking that would somehow encourage new trees to come up and that would diversify the national of the county park. But he was overdoing it, and although certainly you need old trees to come down and allow new trees to come up, but he was not doing it in a way that nature would do it. And natural resource managers think they have to manage, and sometimes they don't. Sometimes it's better to let nature do it. We need to provide funding and staff for the DNR to do this, for county conservation departments to do it, but do it in a way that mimics nature. And certainly develop invasive species management plans. If you've ever tried on your own property to let the woods or woodlands develop, or develop a prairie remnant on your property, you know that invasive species can be a real problem. And so it's important to have management plans to deal with invasive species. And eventually, if we do that, then the natural native species will take over. Let's go to the next slide. An important part of the strategies for wildlife are for recreation. If people get out and use and enjoy the natural areas, get out and observe wildlife, they will have a better understanding of what a natural area looks like and how it should be, and also perhaps take a more personal stake in protecting wildlife habitat and wildlife. So it's important as a strategy in this plan that they talk about research on how Iowans can use and enjoy the wildlife and wildlife habitat for recreation. So let's go to the next slide. But we need to implement these strategies. So these are laudable concepts, and we certainly applaud the DNR for doing a great job in setting out all the information that they have put into the Wildlife Action Plan. But they don't really grapple with the challenges in persuading legislators to adequately fund the DNR or to institute ways to increase wildlife habitats from landowners and others who could assist in this effort. Iowa has one of the lowest amounts of public land in the nation. And the concepts described in the action plan don't really describe ways to persuade landowners and farmers to provide more wildlife habitat in the face of economic pressures and concerns about property rights. And they don't describe in the action plan how to engage agriculture and landowner organizations in joining in the effort. At the legislature, I think a lot of the organizations that could help in encouraging landowners to be involved actually take more of an adversarial position, and that's unfortunate. And the Wildlife Action Plan should have addressed these challenges, but didn't, and perhaps because of political pressure, or they didn't want to stick their neck out too far, but we can and we should. So it's up to the DNR and the legislature to make the plan a reality. So let's go to the next slide. And here's what we can do. Contact our legislators and ask that they fund the the Department of Natural Resources, particularly the Natural Resource Area and the Wildlife Bureau. When the DNR has adequate funds, they can do a lot more in public outreach, trying to get more public land, and carrying out the strategies in the Wildlife Action Plan. And encourage and ensure that the Wildlife Action Plan is followed by the DNR. As I've said, the staff at DNR have done a very good job of setting out what the information that we have is, and providing strategies for putting the Wildlife Action Plan into action. But the administrative level at DNR are political appointees, and so we need to encourage and ensure that all of the DNR do what needs to be done to take the wildlife action plan into reality. Next, we need to fully fund the Resource Enhancement and Protection Act at $20 million. It's never really been fully funded by the legislature. And the framework for funding needs to be maintained so that it goes to protect natural areas, soil conservation, water quality, and historical resources. There have been some efforts in the legislature to change that framework so that the funding specifically to protect natural areas is reduced, and we want to maintain that funding. And finally, to implement what's called I Will is technically called the Outdoor Resource and the Natural Resource and Outdoor Recreation Fund. It's a constitutional amendment in the Iowa Constitution that if the sales tax is ever raised, 3/8 cents of that tax would go for purposes of protecting and enhancing water quality and natural areas in the state, including parks, trails, and fish and wildlife habitat, and conserving agricultural soils. The legislature has never increased the sales tax. And in fact, there have been efforts to try to repeal that trust fund. So we need to keep pushing for the legislature to increase the sales tax and fund that that trust fund so that we have more money to put into the environment. So, and we put the email address or of the legislative website where you can find your legislator's email address to write to them and ask that they do all of these efforts to protect Iowa's natural areas and wildlife. If legislators hear from us, they will respond. And I would also add, we have an election coming up this year, and so make sure that you go to your legislators' legislative forums, campaign meetings, events, and insist that they take action to protect Iowa's wildlife and habitat. So with that, I think we'll take any questions people might have.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Wally. You always do such a fantastic job. We do have one quick question. We talked a lot about, what we can do on the legislative side. What are some easy things that landowners can do on their own property?
Well, you can have a conservation easement, which it means you still own the property, but that you're allowing the property to be used for natural habitat. If you have a farmland or a rural property, you can put it in various U.S. Department of Agriculture programs like the Conservation Reserve Program, um, and others that I have trouble keeping track of. They keep changing them. But there are certainly, but if you go to your local Farm Service Agency or Natural Resource Conservation Service office, they're agencies of the U.S. Department of Agriculture. They can help you navigate the requirements for putting your land in some sort of conservation status that could be used for wildlife habitat and natural area set aside. I said earlier that over 80% of our land in Iowa is used for agriculture, but maybe some of that could be set aside. And so I would encourage landowners to look into that.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much again, Wally. We always appreciate having you and welcoming us into 2026. And thank you so much for everybody that joined us today. We hope that you had a great holiday season and start to your 2026. We will see you again next Friday with some conversations on nuclear and tritium. So we are excited to give you some updates and talk to you about that. If you have any questions, feel free to put them in the comments and or email us and we'll get back to you on that. But with that, thank you so much again and have a fantastic rest of your day, everybody. Bye-bye.